What I'm going to take us through tonight is the Stations of the Cross. So this won't be a Tenebrae, which was what we normally do at our Monday, Thursday. But since we're doing Good Friday, I'm going to have us go through the Stations of the Cross. But the service is similar to what we've done with the Tenebrae in that we're going to have a number of readings, a few hymns, um, and so for the readings, I am perfectly fine doing all or any of them. But if others are willing to read, that would be great. I don't mind doing the long ones. There is one really short one, if so, somebody wants to hold out for that. I think it's one verse. Um, and then for the singing, I am thinking that we go back to just muting ourselves. But welcome to our Good Friday service. Um, so this is based on the idea of the Stations of the Cross. And this is a thing that goes way back in Christian tradition. It originated with pilgrimages that people would take to Jerusalem to remember and commemorate Jesus' final days. And they would want to walk along, people would walk along the Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrow, and the final events and the places of Jesus' earthly ministry. And so even today in Jerusalem, you'll see there in the old city, there are 14 stations marking different events in those last hours of Jesus' earthly ministry. And then John Paul II came up with a slightly different set of the 14 stages that's a little more biblically specific. And so that's the one I'm going to have us follow. So we begin. Oh, something at the bottom. We begin in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I'll read this one because it's kind of long. Oh, and one other thing I'll mention is I'll have some photos in between as well. And these are all taken from the trip that Jenny and I made to Israel. I think it was in 2016. So they're all my own pictures of these places. Okay. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. He said to the disciples, "Stay here while I go and pray over there." When he took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, he began to feel sad and anxious. Then he said to them, "I'm very sad as if I'm dying. Stay here and keep alert with me." And he went a short distance farther and fell on his face and prayed, "My Father, if it's possible, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not what I want, but what you want." He came back to the disciples and found them sleeping. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you stay alert 1 hour with me? Stay alert and pray so that you won't give in to temptation. The spirit is eager, the flesh is weak." And here we see on the left the part of the Garden of Gethsemane where there are mostly olive trees. And these trees are estimated to be anywhere from 800 to a couple of thousand years old. So some of these trees were probably there, those same trees when Jesus was there. And on the right, this is from a church nearby there, showing Jesus praying, leaning on the rock. Someone want to read the second reading?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
Suddenly, while Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came with a mob carrying swords and clubs. They had been sent by the chief priests, legal experts, and elders. His betrayer had given them a sign: "Arrest the man I kiss and take him away under guard." As soon as he got there, Judas said to Jesus, Rabbi. Then he kissed him. Then they came and grabbed Jesus and arrested him. Mark 14:43 through 46.
And now let's sing together the first verse of "'Tis Midnight and on Olive's Brow." And I'll remind us to go ahead and mute ourselves while the music plays.
We just won't sing. We'll just mouth the words.
Oh, okay. That's what I was going to do, because I think if I mute mine, you won't hear the music.
As morning came, the elders of the people, both chief priests and legal experts, came together, and Jesus was brought before their council. They said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." He answered, "If I tell you, you won't believe. And if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the human one will be seated on the right side of the power of God." They all said, "Are you God's son then?" He replied, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need further testimony? We've heard it from his own lips."
Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant woman came and said to him, "You are also with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it in front of all of them, saying, "I don't know what you are talking about." When we went over to the gate, another woman saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." With a solemn pledge, he denied it again, saying, "I don't know the man." A short time later, those standing there came and said to Peter, "You must be one of them. The way you talk gives you away." Then he cursed and swore, "I don't know the man." At the very moment the rooster crowed, Peter remembered Jesus' words, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter went out
And cried
and cried
uncontrollably.
uncontrollably.
All right, now we'll sing the first verse of Jesus Walked This Lonesome Valley.
At daybreak, the chief priests with the elders, legal experts, and the whole Sanhedrin formed a plan. They bound Jesus, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate. Pilate questioned him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "That's what you say." The chief priests were accusing him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Aren't you going to answer? What about all these accusations?" But Jesus gave no more answers, so that Pilate marveled. Pilate wanted to satisfy the crowd, so he released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus whipped, then handed him over to be crucified.
Thank you. And if you remember from my Palm Sunday sermon, this is the same Pilate who would have processed into the town from the west on a horse with soldiers and everything to keep the peace. And so when they bring this Jesus to him who's riling things up, this is what happens. And just to show the contentiousness of life even today in Jerusalem, the picture on the left there is of a wall that separates the Jewish and Palestinian parts of Jerusalem itself. The city itself is divided. And on the right, at the bottom there, you see this little ladder there. This is part of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Sepulchre meaning tomb. So it's the church where traditionally where they think that the tomb was located of Jesus. And there's a lot of contention around this area, as you can imagine. It's a very holy site. And so you have the Roman Catholic and Coptic Christians and Orthodox of different varieties and who all have different areas in this church, different kind of shrines. And at one point, they all signed an agreement that nobody's going to try to take anybody else's area or try to move anything. And so everything would just stay as it is now. And apparently when they wrote that, or when they agreed to it, this ladder was out here because somebody had been doing some work on the outside of the building. And so it stays there to this day. And that's why I put a little railing there, because that ladder is part of that. It cannot be moved because of the agreement they made. Shows how the religious leaders can get entrenched and contentious with one another.
Then Pilate had Jesus taken and whipped. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and dressed him in a purple robe. Over and over, they went up to him and said, "Greetings, King of the Jews." And they slapped him in the face.
This picture shows part of the traditional location of the dungeon in which Jesus was held. As with the prophet Jeremiah at one time was thrown into a cistern. I don't know if a cistern is a hollowed out stone cavern in a way to catch rainwater. So you see the opening at the top there, which is where the water would be channeled to there, and then it would come down into the basin below. And so the prophet Jeremiah at one point was imprisoned by being thrown into a cistern. So that was one way that they would do that. And so that, they think this is where Jesus was held while he was being tried, and he was whipped and beaten. And when we were there, there is a little lectern sitting with a binder open, and it has the words of Psalm 88 in about 20 different languages. Psalm 28 or 88, which is maybe one of the darkest nights of the soul kind of psalms. The last line of the psalm could be translated, "Darkness is my only friend." When the chief priests and their deputies saw him, they shouted out, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate told them, "You take him and crucify him. I don't find any grounds for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders cried out, "Take him away, take him away, crucify him." Pilate responded, "What? Do you want me to crucify your king?" "We have no king except the emperor," the chief priest answered. Then Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. The soldiers took Jesus prisoner, carrying his cross by himself. He went out to a place called Skull Place. In Aramaic, it's Golgotha. And in this photo, you see part of the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows. This is part of the path along which Jesus likely had to carry, or more likely drag, his cross.
Simon, a man from Cyrene, Alexander, and Rufus' father, was coming in from the countryside. They forced him to carry his cross.
And now we'll sing the first verse of "Were You There?"
A huge crowd of people followed Jesus, including women who were mourning and wailing for him. Jesus turned to the women and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Rather, cry for yourselves and your children. The time will come when they will say, 'Happy are those who are unable to become pregnant, the wombs that never gave birth, and the breasts that never nursed a child.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' If they do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?"
Thank you.
When they arrived at the place called the Skull, they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." They drew lots as a way of dividing up his clothing.
Thank you. Crucifixion was a very gruesome way to die. It was intended to take a long time and to be torture. We think about the nails that went through his wrists and the through his ankles and the spear in his side, but what killed you in crucifixion was asphyxiation. You died of not getting enough air, because hanging like that with your arms out makes it hard to breathe, and you'd have to push your feet to get your head up enough to get some air. And eventually the person became weaker and weaker and was unable to do that, and then they slowly suffocated. And I don't want to say that to be gruesome, but this is the depth that Jesus was willing to go to, what he was willing to face for speaking truth. And in the midst of that, he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him. Don't you fear God, seeing that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus replied, I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise.
And so now we'll sing those words, and it will play through 5 times. So take this opportunity to just let the music and the words fill you and move into them. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there, it says the music is from Jacques Berthier. I probably didn't say that right, but in the community of Taizé. And Taizé is a monastic community in France that is known for its music, and they have worship multiple times a day, and it's very simple songs like this with just one or two lines, and they'll sing them over and over again, and often have an icon, an image of Jesus, or one of the saints or something. And it's a very powerful experience, and people come from all over the world actually to spend time in that community. And this is probably my favorite one of their songs. Is, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene, stood near the cross. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. In Nazareth, there is a church, the Basilica of the Annunciation, commemorating the appearance of the angel Gabriel to Mary to tell her about this impending birth. And countries from all over the world created artistic depictions of Mary in different ways. These are just two of them. And in that passage, we see at the end of his life on the cross, suffocating to death, he takes the time to make sure that his mother's taken care of. It was now about noon, and darkness covered the whole earth until about 3 o'clock, while the sun stopped shining. Then the curtain in the sanctuary tore down the middle. Crying out in a loud voice, Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I entrust my life." After he said this, he breathed for the last time. And I will sing the first verse of What Wondrous Love Is This?
That evening, a man named Joseph came. He was a rich man from Arimathea who had become a disciple of Jesus. He came to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate gave him permission to take it. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had carved out of the rock. After he rolled a large stone at the door of the tomb, and he went away.
And this is the tomb of Jesus inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you can see how ornate it is and decorated. But around the corner, there are these tombs, which look much more like the one that Jesus likely would have been laid in. Let us pray. God, on this day, we remember your willingness to go as far as death to convince us of your love. You spoke out against the powers that be, religious and civil, until they could take it no more, and they took your life. We can't imagine the pain and the devastation you went through. But we know that every day in our world, people are being crucified, perhaps not on crosses, but at the end of a gun or a knife, at the edge of injustice, from the pangs of starvation. Jesus, remember us when you come into your kingdom. Amen. Our service is concluded until we meet anew in the sanctuary in a couple of days. So go in peace.